Welcome to Following, a weekly podcast where we will discuss how to follow Jesus. Christianity is not an event you attend, it's a life you live. Join us each week as we dive into the intersection of real-life circumstances and the life-changing Word of God. Come, follow Jesus with us.
You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how will it be made salty again? It is good for nothing anymore except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do men light a lamp and put it under a peck measure, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Matthew 5:13-16.
All right, welcome back to Following. Phil, how are you doing?
I'm all right. How about you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, doing good. My two of the three fantasy teams that I'm in are doing pretty good. Those two teams, funnily enough, are the only two that I didn't draft myself. They were auto drafts. The one team that I did draft is doing awful.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think my fantasy's doing okay today. My Colts are not, which is disappointing, but it is what it is.
Not surprising though, I guess.
Did you say not surprising?
No. Anyway, so we're still in this this little break from John where we're discussing some issues concerning the political arena. Last week we talked about abortion. The week before, what did we talk about the week before? I just drew a blank.
1 Peter 2, about the kind of life that we live.
Yeah, like submitting to authorities. Yeah, that's right. And then this week we're going to be talking about some characteristics of a person who belongs to the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. But not only that, you kind of brought this idea in your sermon that there's this decay in the world that's happening, and it's because of sin. Mm-hmm. The fall brought sin. Of course, Christ conquers sin and establishes His kingdom, and so now we're to be salt and light, as Matthew says. So maybe just explain this idea of decay that sin brings, and how us being salt and light, how does that all connect to this series that we're doing, in terms of this political series that we're doing?
Well, I think a lot of times we tend to focus on a particular politician or a particular platform or a particular strategy of political effort in order to make a difference. And that's our chief objective. That's what we've got to do. And we almost become single-minded focused on that. And I don't think that's what Jesus commands us to do. I think what He commands us to do is to be salt and light. And I think part of being salt and light is stepping into the political arena and is voting and things of that nature. But there's so much more to that.
Yeah.
Because all of our life should reflect the glory of Christ, the beauty of Christ. It should make Christ desirable. Mm-hmm. People should see the difference that walking in the way of Jesus makes versus walking in the way of selfishness makes. Sin has entered the world and broken everything. Everything sin touches breaks. It's like a bull in a china cabinet. It just moves and breaks everything. Broken relationships, broken families, broken health. There's so many consequences for sin. It's destructive, and it ultimately leads to death. But the way of Christ is the way that we were created to live and designed to live, and it's walking in His way that leads to ever increasing flourishing, ever increasing gladness of heart, ever increasing peace of mind. And as we become those people, as we are gradually and steadily transformed into the image of Christ, that healthiness kind of slows the decay of the culture around us. As we follow Jesus, we are kind of acting as a preservative agent on the culture, so that it doesn't go to destruction as rapidly as possible. For instance, like if you, as a Christian, you speak your mind on a political issue, and you are particularly intellectual, and you can argue about it, and you can clarify your points, and you can begin to persuade people. You are bringing to bear into the public square a biblical worldview, and helping people to realize that this other worldview doesn't work. It doesn't match with reality, and it's not going to lead to flourishing. It's going to lead to harm.
Yeah.
As in the case of abortion or transgenderism or any of those kinds of things. But another way that we act as that preservative agent, and our worldview is implemented throughout the culture in a way that kind of slows down decay, is in our voting. When we vote on things like here in Missouri on Amendment 3, which is about legalizing abortion, if we vote no to that, we slow this state's ability to murder babies, which is a good thing. It slows the decay of the society. But if that passes, then that decay is accelerated. And so Christians must vote their convictions. They must vote biblically. We need to be well informed about those things, because as a voting member of this society, we have a responsibility to be a preservative, to think, speak, vote from a biblical point of view. And when we do that, it helps slow down the rapid decay.
Yeah, that's huge, because I think that often we get like into this mindset. I see people on Twitter with this kind of mindset that like the political sphere is purely secular. And so we've talked about this in the last couple of podcasts as well. But because that's secular, it's not the church's business to speak into. And what I think has happened, and correct me if I'm wrong, but over the last, I don't know how many decades, but it's almost as if as Christianity has declined in the U.S., the role of pastor has almost changed in the political sphere. Before, I don't think that there was pastor. I mean, there might have been pastors, speaking on political matters. Sure, there probably was, but there was there were probably more just statesmen that were Christian, that had bold convictions, that had a clear understanding of God's word, and there was more of those people that would speak to the political issues. And pastors didn't have that need, right? They could minister to their congregation, they could shepherd their people, but now it's almost as if pastors are the only ones who are well informed enough on both political and theological matters, and whatever the case might be. I see some of these pastors on Twitter or X, and they're like, well, the political arena is purely secular. Neither one of these candidates are believers. Neither one of these candidates are good people, and so I'm not going to vote. Like my conscience will not allow me to vote because I can't vote for someone this immoral, who has this much baggage, who's okay with this kind of sin, or who is okay with this kind of policy on abortion, whatever it is. And so then their solution then is to sort of stick their head in the sand a little bit and then sort of just watch the world go into decay. Instead of voting for the lesser evil, as has been the saying for the last few election cycles, vote for the lesser evil, they've decided to vote for no evil and then watch evil win. And so then the decay continues to spiral. Is that kind of what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I would agree. I don't agree with that position that you don't vote because you don't like either one of the candidates. I think that in our political world, you have two options, and neither one of them are perfect. Neither one of them, both of them have flaws. But I think it's foolish to say that they're both equally problematic. I think one brings more destructive policy to the general welfare of the country, to the general welfare of the American citizen, and by and large to the world stage as well. I think makes the world more dangerous. And I have reasons for thinking that. And so when I vote, we have to vote with what we have in front of us. That's just what we have. So you choose the one that is the less offensive, the one that's policies line up more closely I mean, nobody's going to line up perfectly with a biblical worldview, I don't think. I mean, you might get a Christian. That would be wonderful. But we don't have that. And so you choose a candidate that's policies and platform more closely aligns than the other. And I think by doing that, you can help slow the decay. But again, I think that there has to be a recognition of two things. A recognition first that I have a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of my society. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways I do that is by speaking my mind. This idea that the political spectrum is secular, and so faith can't speak into that is just nonsensical. Yeah. Secularism is just another religious ideology. It's a theological viewpoint of the world that dismisses God as the king of the universe. And so when you just say, well, we're not allowed to speak into that, you're just giving the idolatry the whole platform and not speaking truth. They're not speaking truth. Mm-hmm. They're speaking a version of reality that doesn't match reality. And thus when that happens, you allow people, for instance, maybe I feel like I'm rambling, but like an example, like with the trans situation with especially with children, when we're allowing a political ideology to allow children to be mutilated, to mutilate their bodies, because of a political viewpoint, and we say we can't speak into that because that's a political issue. No. We have to speak into that because that is a moral issue. That is every issue is a moral issue. Every issue is coming forth from your set of understanding about how the world works and why we should live a particular way. Of course, we're going to have disagreements on that because we come from different backgrounds. We come from different religious viewpoints, and secularism is just one more religious viewpoint among many. Mm-hmm. So we most definitely should be speaking into that to preserve life, to save life, to prevent people from hurting other people, whether it's in abortion or transgenderism or countless other issues out there. So you have to engage. You have to be involved. Does that mean that you should be out knocking on doors and passing out pamphlets? No, not necessarily. I think that the bare minimum as a Christian, you need to be voting. Mm-hmm. You need to be voting, and you need to be graciously conversational about why you're voting the way you're voting. Have conversations. It doesn't have to devolve into anger and shouting like you see on social media or like you see on the news. That everybody wants to stir everybody up in anger because anger. The quickest way to try and lever somebody to do what you want them to do is get them angry. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't lead to lasting change. Lasting change is accomplished through the will, and you reach the will through the mind and convincing them, persuading them. Because a lot of people do a lot of foolish things in the heat of the moment and then regret it immediately after it's over. So I think we have to be very careful there. But we need to be speaking the truth graciously, and we need to have conversations about why we're voting the way we're voting. But at the end of the day, we have to trust God. Mm-hmm. We have to trust God. He is in control. Yeah. Even if the candidate you want doesn't win, doesn't mean God's not in control. Doesn't mean Satan is winning. God does lots of things. He's allowed lots of nations to crumble in consequence for their sins. He gives people over to their sin. That's one of the expressions of his wrath. And I hope that doesn't happen for our country. But until that does happen, I think we have to live out the life of Christ. We have to pray earnestly. We have to speak the gospel, live the gospel, vote according to our biblical convictions, and trust God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. So I kind of want to move into so you said one of the ways that we do this reversing of the decay or slowing the decay is by voting. I 100% agree. But let's talk into some more practical, like how do we cultivate? So in an age of people who whoever can talk loudest and fastest wins the argument. And in that kind of sphere, how do we as Christians cultivate an ability to talk to people in respectful and humble and gentle ways? How do we cultivate this characteristic? Like in your sermon, you preached. We just read a few verses, but you preached on the whole Beatitudes, and we kind of walked through all of those, and we won't do that again. We won't rehash it. You can go listen to it if you want. But what are some ways that we can cultivate this kind of characteristic that is willing and able to clearly and humbly communicate ideas instead of yelling and screaming and biting each other's heads off?
A gentle answer turns away wrath. A harsh word stirs it up. I think we have to trust God knows what he's talking about. And I think we have to stop being angry. And I think we have to stop yelling at one another. And I think we need to put on the characteristics of Christ, as you see in this, a humble heart, a peacemaker kind of spirit, a pure in heart, a merciful person. So these characteristics are characteristics of Christ, and they should be increasing characteristics in our own lives. So as we begin to interact with people, living these characteristics out as normal in our everyday lives, I think they see, even if it doesn't change the world in a moment, I think what you begin to see is that people listen to you. People respect you at a certain level. The way of Christ it makes the gospel attractive. When Christians live faithfully the way of Jesus, it makes the good news of Jesus desirable and attractive. Not always. Sometimes it results in persecution. But for a lot of people, it is that which draws them to Christ. That these people actually love me. These people actually care about my well-being. These people actually listen to me. They don't just write me off. They're willing to sit down and talk through things with me. They're willing to sit down, and we don't have to convince somebody in one conversation. We're willing to cultivate a relationship and play the long game there. Some would say, well, we don't have time for that. We've been saying that for centuries, literally. I like to read history, and there have been these kinds. I think we've reached a new pitch of hatred and lying and vile talking about the other candidate and the other political party. But if you go all the way back to George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson really kind of ratcheted up that kind of political attack against his opponent, even George Washington, which was kind of stunning that he would do something like that. But if you read history, American history, there's always been newspapers on one side or the other. There's always been political hit pieces. There's always been a fear mongering, stirring up. The country's going to die if we don't vote this way. We can't do that. I mean, it may in the providence of God, but if it's going to happen in the providence of God, our finger mongering is not going to change anything. And people aren't going to make lasting change because they're afraid. They're going to make lasting change because they see the reality and they go that direction. So.
Yeah, there's some guys on a podcast that I like to listen to, and they were discussing hospitality was the topic, and a part of that podcast, a small section of it was just discussing how different, like say a new couple comes to the church, and their one thing that they can say about this church is like, man, this is so unique than anything that we've ever experienced in culture, because like whenever you guys get together, you're not discussing or arguing over politics. You're not at each other's throats about this or that issue going on in the day. Like you just love each other. You're serving each other. You're cooking meals together. Like you and so that's kind of what I'm picturing. As I think about a culture that we want to build in our Christian circles, is a culture of people that love one another, that care for one another, regardless of disagreements and political matters. Like that's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to talk about those things. That's another thing. Like sometimes it's like that the unofficial rule list at Thanksgiving dinner is don't talk about politics, religion, and so we just kind of ignore those conversations. I don't think we should do that either, but we need to learn and learn how to cultivate these, the ability to have these kind of discussions without well, I'm never talking to that guy again. Like he disagrees with me on this issue. I have no respect for him anymore. And so I guess the question is, what are some steps that we can do to kind of stir those or cultivate those characteristics up? How can we actually? I mean, because the reality is we're in this world that is constantly telling us that this is how you debate, this is how you converse on differences, is by yelling, by arguing, by talking faster than the other person, and even by slandering right to their face, misinterpreting what they're saying so that you can sound superior. All of these things happen in debates, and it doesn't take very long scrolling through social media to find something like that. So how do we practically cultivate something different than that, something other than what the world is doing today?
Yeah, godliness is not something you just decide to do and do. Been reading a lot by Dallas Willard lately, and an author I would highly recommend to our listeners. But he talks about spiritual formation a lot and the importance of training, because the purpose of training is to be able to do what you cannot do by direct effort. And so this idea, I can't just go out and run a marathon. I'd have to train for that so that my body is capable of running a marathon. We can't just decide to be humble, or we can't just decide to be compassionate, or we can't just decide to be merciful, or we can't just decide to be gentle, or whatever it might be. But we have to train our hearts to be that way. Well, how do we do that? It depends on what your particular issue is. The spiritual disciplines are disciplines of, where you withdraw participation in something in order to teach yourself self-control, or you participate in something in order to kind of train the muscles of faith to help you trust God. So it's kind of different. I would recommend The Great Omission by Dallas Willard. It's a really good fundamental book on training yourself into godliness. Another one would be The Practice of Godliness by Jerry Bridges. It's really, really helpful. Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life by Don Whitney is pretty good. The Life You've Always Wanted, I think is the name of it, by John Ortberg, is really good. The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by Comer, The Practicing the Way by Comer, both of those are good books too. So these are just some general books that kind of speak into this issue of becoming an authentic follower of Jesus Christ. So much of our Christian life is reduced to, I go to church. What does it mean to be a Christian? It means I go to church. No, I mean that's a small slice of what it means to be a Christian. Being a Christian means walking in the way of Jesus. It means living out a godly life. And so how do we cultivate that? You have to train yourself in godliness. How do you do that? It depends. It depends on the particular sin you're struggling with. It depends on the particular personality that you have. But check out some of these resources and begin growing in godliness.
Yeah, I can try to put those in the show notes if I can find them. You'll have to give me a list of all those. But yeah, I'll put them in the show notes. You can check those out. I would also recommend that you go and listen to the sermon from today. Like I said, we didn't rehash all of the Beatitudes, but Phil, you really did a wonderful job at explaining verse by verse kind of these Beatitudes of here's how you are poor in spirit. Well, here's what that means. Here's why here's why that you inherit the kingdom because of that, and so on for the rest of those.
And we did give some practical advice, like this is a possible way that you could cultivate that.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, if you go listen to that sermon, you'll see an idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and you can get there just hopeformacon.com/YouTube. Check that out. Phil, anything else?
No, I think this is a good conversation for today.
Yeah. So we would just encourage you to check out those resources. And I was just thinking at the last bit that you were talking about there. We talked about in Sunday school class this morning about how to interpret the New Testament. We talked about some indicative imperative type stuff like you see in the New Testament, and one of the examples was in 1 Peter 15, and I just kind of want to leave the listeners off with this. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Keep sober in spirit. Set your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts which were yours in your ignorance. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior, because it is written, "You shall be holy, for I am holy." So until next week, keep following Jesus. Thanks again for tuning in to Following. We truly hope you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful. If you did enjoy this episode, we'd ask that you go and hit the follow button and share this podcast with your friends and your family. If you'd like to hear more on this text, visit the link in the description and you can watch or listen to this sermon on this text. For more resources like this, go to hopeformacon.com. Until next week, keep following Jesus.